The US market has probably led the way for a number of years now with regards to building the value in their franchises. They understand the product, they understand how to pick it up, build it, brand it, and make money out of it. You've then got the whole economy of football and fair play, and the league has to be balanced. There has to be jeopardy in the league. You don't want to go to a game where you know that such and such a team is going to win 5-0.
Welcome to the Football Economy, the podcast where we discuss the ins and outs of the football industry. Today's guest is Tony Faulkner, former professional footballer and now a leading voice in sports business innovation. As co-founder and managing director of VSI, Tony launched the world's first MSc in sports directorship and a pioneering executive program for sports CEOs. Now in its 12th cohort, with over 400 alumni globally, including Kara Batsley, former England goalkeeper, Marisa Owers, director of women's football, and also Aston Villa's former captain, and Lee Dykes, the technical director of Brentford FC. Also, Julian Lescott, ex-Man City footballer who won the Premier League, and Ugochu Nyowu, who was the former AC Milan player, but also played for Newcastle, if I'm not mistaken, and he's currently VP of Sporting at US Soccer Federation. So some very impressive alumni, and there are other alumni I've not mentioned. VSI is focused on reshaping the future of sports leadership, and in this episode, we're going to explore Tony's journey from the pitch to the boardroom, the rise of sports education, lead performance psychology, and what's next for leadership in global sports. So without any further ado, Tony, welcome to the Football Economy. So the first question I'll point to is if we reflect back on your career from playing as a footballer to where you are right now, which is spearheading one of the most effective institutions for sports, what would you say has been the most surprising aspect of that journey for you?
Oh, many surprises along the way, I'm sure. Surprising, yeah, interesting question. It's been a very interesting journey. It's been a very exciting journey, inspirational. At the same time, when you're running a business, you can have some horrendous times and everything in between. But I think what football and sport enables you to do is to develop a level of resilience, a level of discipline, and a level of commitment that stands you in good stead moving forward for whatever industry you tend to go into. Using football as an example, you fail quite often, i.e., you lose games, whether that be games at a weekend or whether that be games in training. You very often are in the limelight for a lot of people to critique you and tell you what you're not doing and what you should be doing. And that develops a level of resilience within you, which I believe is a fundamental life skill that is required in order for any individual to perform in any industry that they're in. So those examples and that development that I went through as a young person, as a young footballer, I believe has given me a level of resilience and a level of determination in order to build a business in the sector, which is not easy, just like building any business. There's lots and lots and lots of challenges, and it's too easy to think that this isn't for you. You're not able to do this, and to walk away without really understanding whether you're capable of being able to succeed in that area. I wouldn't say there's been many surprises, but what I would say is that each step, each experience has just been giving you the courage and the belief to be able to keep going and get to a point as we are today, have a substantial business with a great brand in the area of executive education in sport and football.
Awesome. So when we look back at your journeys, you just took us through it in a very concise manner. I know that you had a consultancy or a psychological consultancy that was doing very well in Boston. How did that shape your sort of the way you implemented your sports institution here in the UK?
Yeah, so it was during my time at Blackburn Rovers. I was head of the medical department and moved into a more performance-led role. And I went to university whilst I was in that role, and I did Neuroscience, which I found fascinating. It really did answer a lot of questions that I had with regards to how people respond to given situations, how I respond to given situations. And that enabled me to delve deeper into the psyche of individuals, the psyche of teams, the psyche of different relationships, different hierarchies, and look, opportunities, systems, and processes that I could use on a personal level, but I could also bring into my role as a performance related person in football. So I did that course over in America. I think that was about 2006, 2005, 2006. And then whilst I was at Blackburn Rovers, we brought in a fascinating individual called Yehuda Shiner from Israel, who at the time had just been very successful with the England Rugby Union team in the World Cup 2003. And I read an article developed what was called this winning concept, which was about cognitively managing your mind in high pressurized situations. And I thought that would work great within our environment at Blackburn Rovers. We tracked Yuda down and we brought him into the club. And I then became the project manager overseeing the winning culture within Blackburn Rovers Academy up to kind of under 23s at that particular time. And just exposed me even more to that area. I started developing relationships with people like Professor Carol Dweck, who is a renowned psychologist working in the area of mindset from Stanford University, America. Myself and my colleague at Blackburn Rovers, a gentleman called Steve Nixon, who's now head of recruitment at Newcastle, visited Stanford University, should I say, in America. We did a week's workshop with Carol Dweck, and we then brought that back to Blackburn Rovers with regard to how we could work with the performance staff so that we could educate those guys into creating an environment where we were developing a growth mindset in individuals.
So we then developed a profile which we used in football to profile the psychosocial behaviors and characteristics that we thought were fundamental in us being able to then develop individuals with the right mindset to becoming elite athletes. And we profiled thousands of individuals in the UK in football clubs in the main, but we also then trialed it in rugby. And we also used it in some big universities over in America and a lot of the smaller soccer clubs that were out there, but had thousands of individuals within the club. Off the back of that, I then moved into a role at Manchester City, the performance manager from 2010 to 2013. And I was very intrigued at that point as to what the role of the sporting director was. In 2010, it was in its infancy in the UK. There were one or two clubs that were appointing people into those roles, but they didn't really understand what the role was. And therefore, the individuals that got appointed into those roles didn't particularly have the knowledge. They didn't really have the skill set. So it was a disaster waiting to happen. If you don't know what the role is, you appoint the wrong person, you're only going one way. So from 2009 through to about 2013, so that crossed my roles at Blackburn Rovers and Manchester City. I visited institutes of best practice all over the world, places like the New Zealand All Blacks, NBA clubs and NFL clubs in the US. I got the opportunity to go into Google and Apple in Silicon Valley whilst we were visiting Stanford, and then multiple clubs all over the world, starting with the likes of your Barças, your Bayerns, your Juventuses, and then followed that down to some of the smaller clubs that were performing way and above with regards to where you would expect them to be. And from that, born the VSI Sporting Directors course. It was an idea I had when I was at Manchester City. There was no qualification, and well, I'll correct that. As far as we were aware, in 2012, there was a 12-week, if I remember correctly, course that the Italian Football Association ran. So we decided to develop the world's first master's degree in 2012, and we went live in Manchester the year later. And we've been delivering that ever since now, both in Manchester and online. And we've also had a course that we've delivered in partnership with Inter Miami over in America.
It's a very comprehensive view of how effective, trying to improve the performance aspects of the football industry, but also trying to provide a pathway to executive positions. So my focus here would be around different aspects of what VSI does, but also your experience challenging, how that should be effective in the industry. So the first question around something I've come across is the SCARF model. I'll take a step back. I think Carol of the book that she authored was the Growth Mindset book, which has obviously been a paradigm shifting book across all industries, in the tech industry, aviation, every industry, even politics potentially. Maybe not. But yeah. But sort of paint to us what the SCARF model is. Explain it to us, break it down, and how that relates to executive training and developing the next set of leaders in the future.
Yeah, so I came across the SCARF model in the mid 2000s when I was doing my neuroscience course across in Boston. And I think some of the challenges with various models is individuals will pick up a model, it will relate to them at that moment in time, and then everything that they do from that point on will be based on that model. This is what you do, this is why you do it, it's the only model in the world, and this is how you use it. So I've been very aware of that over the years as I've picked up on different techniques and tools. But the SCARF model related to me back in the day with regards to experiences that I have with individuals, and also experiences that I have internally. So the SCARF model stands for, the acronym SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And the domain of neuroscience, going back a number of years, would explain that as human beings, regardless of where we come from and the different cultures we experience, those aspects of status, certainty, etc., are experiences that we go through every single day. So, for an example, and I'll make this very simple, but if we meet someone for the first time, we shake hands, we say hello. It might be a subconscious process going on in the back of your mind that that individual might be better dressed than I am. He might have more expensive shoes on than I do. She might look prettier than I am, etc., etc. And automatically that has a subconscious process in your mind which might reduce your status, for example. And if your status is reduced, then often the emotional center of the brain becomes more active, and then your thought process and your behaviors can become a little bit more emotional and a little bit more irrational. So you're not in, should we say, the prime position to be able to think correctly in a given situation. So if you break those subcomponents down, certainty, autonomy, and so on, you can then start to see how, if you build up a picture of an individual, maybe that you're working with, so someone in your team, you're able to then better align that person so that they can be more impactful in their role. So autonomy is a great one. If you have someone in your team that requires a great deal of, or should I say, works better in an environment where they've got autonomy, but you consistently try and micromanage them, then you're going to impact their performance negatively. If you have an individual, and this is a real world scenario that I went through many years ago with a member of our staff, an individual required an awful lot of certainty in order for them to feel that they were in the right mindset to perform. And in our business at the time, there wasn't any certainty. In fact, every single day was different, and we had to be very reactive. It wasn't an environment where we could plan for weeks, months ahead. It just wasn't that place. So this particular individual was uncomfortable, wasn't able to perform anywhere near to the best of her ability because she required certainty. Now, it was over a period of time that I became more comfortable with that myself and understanding that in order for this person to achieve and offer the greatest value to the business, I needed to surround her with as much certainty as I possibly could, even though we weren't working in that environment. So it's a continuum. Understanding where that individual sits on that continuum gives you a toolbox through the SCARF model that you are able to play around with. You're able to adapt your behaviors, you're able to adapt your approach so that you can maximize their performance. And at the same time, you can become acutely aware of where you sit on that continuum. So what's important to you? Is it status? Do you need to be given a title within an organization which represents a level of status in order for you to feel comfortable and ready to perform? Or are you someone that's not particularly bothered about a level of status? You might be more linked to fairness. And if I feel that I'm not treated with an element of fairness, then I'm going to be in a position where my motivation, discipline, commitment is impacted negatively. So I think these models can be useful. I've used them when working in football clubs with players. I've introduced them when working with multiple different staff in football clubs. I think because I've been aware of it now, it's always there in the back of my mind. At the same time, neuroscience is a profession which is completely evolving, and models such as these will change, will be refined, and there's going to be something else which may come along and provide you with even more valuable information than what we had 10, 12 years ago.
That's well explained and well said. I mean, when we speak about neuroscience, and I'm not an expert by any stretch, but it's quite clear that it seems like it's under research or underutilized in various industries. I say this because a competitive edge that Ray Dalio, who's the founder of Bridgewater and CEO before he retired recently, he expressed that neuroscience is the reason why he was able to have an elite team in his institution, and this is what gave them a competitive edge over other capital allocators in that sense. But in the football industry, especially when we talk about developing the next crop of footballers, do you think this is also underutilized in a sense as a tool?
I do. I have done for many, many years, and I still do today. I think today there is a greater level of understanding with regards to what neuroscience means to the football industry. And then within the various different departments within that as well. There are more people that are operating in that space. And I think with more educated people in that space, it then becomes easier to explain it and really apply it in that environment. That's the critical thing. I go back to my time at Manchester City. I was brought in to develop a player life skills program, which operated for the players. But I was very keen that that same program must involve the staff, because everyone has to be consistent with the what, the why, and the how. And we were in the process of taking a lot of the neuroscience understanding components and techniques from a classroom where it's very much a conversation based activity, taking it out onto the pitch. So, how could we develop confidence on the pitch, for example? You hear, I've been in so many dressing rooms over the year where a head coach will say to the players, you need to concentrate harder. How do you do that? How do you concentrate harder, particularly when you might not be having a great game, things aren't going for you, etc., etc. So once you have a level of understanding with regards to how the brain functions and which part of the brain is primarily responsible for concentration, such as the prefrontal cortex, then you can start to understand what activities that you could do which stimulate the prefrontal cortex, which in theory will then potentially develop your ability to be able to concentrate, let's say harder, in the words of a dressing room conversation, but you can focus for greater periods of time. You can lose focus and then regain focus. We call it distraction control. And you can develop these techniques to improve your behavior in those various places. And that's not just on a football pitch. You then bring that into my environment. So, at VSI, running our sporting directors courses and developing our chief executive programs. How do you deliver a program in such a way that it's relevant to the real world now, given the tsunami of information that we're all that we all come across each and every single day, having to prioritize what we need to do now and what's not appropriate for us at this moment in time, making any type of educational journey as applied and appropriate as it can be, so that if we then do get into a discussion around what's next, how do we improve this, we've then got a foundation that drives that conversation with regards to what's actually happening in the brain and how we're developing and activating different neurons, which then hopefully start to drive the behaviors that you're looking for given the environments that you're working in. So it's not solely a football, a sports related opportunity. It's across the board, and it's a development process that all individuals are going through. Then, of course, we're challenged by technology and artificial intelligence, which opens up a whole other conversation if in particular we're losing the human at the heart of that. But that's probably for another day.
Yeah, if you're talking about Neuralink and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But so I mean, you've painted a lot of sort of like interesting insights there. If I ask you this question, your experience, do you think clubs have found a way to justify this as a potential ROI generator?
I think they're in this space. I think we've just touched on it there. There's lots of businesses out there nowadays that have various platforms. You just mentioned Neuralink. There's lots of other tools and accessories that are out there which we're seeing sports organizations and individuals use, which are there to stimulate other cognitive development of the brain. Have they been able to deliver an ROI on that? Not so sure. Not so sure. We're seeing consultants operating in this space who are still industrial. What I mean by that, it's the human that's developing how these various integrations are linked into the performance sector. So when I first started doing this, it was back in 2004, 2005. And then went more into a formal delivery of this in 2010. It was too early. It was way too early in the cycle. My knowledge in that space would have been greater but limited in compared to where it potentially should have been. But at the same time, there were so few people within the domain that were prepared to challenge their belief sets, look at the impact that it can have. Of course, it's quite difficult to measure. Even today, it can still be quite difficult to measure. Back in 2010, it had even greater challenges, and that creates fear and threat. We're going back to the scarf model there. So the reward and the threat sensors in the brain are activated, and if the threat sensor in the brain is activated to say, I fear this because I don't know what it is, then straight away people back off and don't want to engage in it. And it wasn't the right time. But you will hear some of the greatest minds in the game recently, and this is not the first time, but recently Arsene Wenger has come out and said that the greatest development in the game is going to happen between the ears. And he's been saying this for a number of years. So I think it's now a case of how we refine what the offering is and how that is implied into the industry, and that return of investment is there on a piece of paper that people will turn around and say, okay, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, you mentioned a very forward-thinking individual in Arsene Wenger. So, in essence, what the sports industry, specifically football, needs is more forward-thinking and open-minded individuals who want to see how to move the needle incrementally for sort of like advantages and competitive advantages to take place for every club or the league itself. But we're talking about revolutionizing sports education and the sports industry. I know that you have the sports directorship as a course, as a program there at VSI. There's a lot of talk about, we know there's manager churn, or coach churn, however you want to, quantify it or contextualize it. There is a thing that is coming into play, or potentially a trend, which is sporting director churn. And my question to you is do you think there's a case of sort of like misunderstanding of what a sporting director should be still in 2025 in the UK market, specifically because the UK historically jumped on this later than the other markets in Europe? And also, what would you say are the key differences for audiences listening to this in different parts of the world when it comes to a sporting director in the UK or in Europe versus a sporting director in the US?
So the VSI Master's degree in Sports Directorship started in 2013. Research that we had been doing in this space started in 2009. We have always, and still to this day, we will advocate the same positioning of the sporting director, but that sporting director should sit in an executive role within that organization and should oversee the whole footballing department. That sporting director would, in the main, report into the day-to-day boss of the business. That might be the CEO, that might be the president, it might be the ownership group. But the sporting director will be accountable for the overall footballing department. So that looks like coaching. Obviously, the manager will sit in there, and we talk about the head coach. And we do believe that the title is quite important to distinguish the various roles. So the head coach, recruitment, sports science, medical, analysis, academy, etc. The sporting director will oversee the whole footballing department. The transition that we've seen over the years there means that the individuals, particularly the head coach, is then positioned so that she can be as good as they are in their various roles. So fundamentally, they coach the team, pick the team, manage the team. The head coach will always get the big bucks. The supporters, the media want to hear from the head coach in most areas of the world. I'll come back to Germany, which is slightly interesting. They will get paid the big bucks because they're there to win games day to day. The sporting director has to be a refined leader and manager of people. He's got to bring the whole footballing function together, hopefully aligned to what the ownership group wants in an ideal world. We know, and we come across multiple experiences where some leadership groups might not communicate exactly what they want, or they actually don't quite know what they want. You might surprise many people, but we often see that as a standout example. The head coach, the sporting director, and that ownership group, we call it the golden triangle. And that has to work as efficiently and as effectively as possible in order to give that organization every chance of being successful, whatever success is to them, as they move forward. And the sporting director has to be a refined individual. If you're overseeing all those football departments, there are multiple people in those departments. In those departments, there are very, very smart people. Most people who will be head of performance, analytics, medical, and so on will have master's degrees, PhDs, etc. So there are a number of people, very smart, experienced individuals that are fighting for visibility and trying to align all this and make sure that you have the ability as a sporting director to lead and to manage and to understand when I lead and when to manage is a skill that is ongoing, and you have to develop different cultures, different expectations. The world we live in now is completely different to the world we lived in 10 years ago. And then, of course, you have this role of the manager, the head coach, who for many, many years has always been seen as being the boss of the business to some extent. And I think that is being more diluted now. And to some individuals in that role, that's quite a challenge. But to many individuals in that role, I think they also welcome the role of a sporting director, because that then frees them up to be able to be as good as they can be in the areas that matter, in the areas where that coach is either going to get an extension to his contract or he's going to get fired based on the performance on the pitch. That then opens up questions linked into what you're saying, sporting director churn. What is the sporting director accountable for? I think traditionally, in the eyes of the footballing public, then the sporting director to some extent has been just another scout, head of recruitment. That person does all the ins and outs, that buys players and lets players go. And whilst that is an extremely important aspect of the role, it's one aspect of the role. bringing the whole football vision, the whole football philosophy, developing the culture, understanding, lots of the external factors now that we're working in. Football is in the UK in particular is heavily regulated. We've got FFP, we've got PSR, we've potentially got talk of this independent regulator and what's this going to look like. We've got the pressures from owners, which again in the UK are in the main now from overseas, and will have a very clear, will have a reason for buying that club. It might be money from private equity over in America, the UAE, other parts of the world. That you may be part of a multi-club ownership model. A couple of weeks ago, we delivered a multi-club ownership seminar on the VSI course, and there are now over 500 clubs worldwide which are considered to be part of an MCO group. 500. So as a sporting director, what does that mean to the role that you're in? You look at Greta Steinson over at Leeds United, who was the SD for Leeds. He's now moved up to the 49ers group that have obviously now purchased Glasgow Rangers. Where the role started, or should I say where we picked up on the role in 2010, and where we are today, most clubs, most organisations have a much better understanding of what the role is, and at the same time, they're able to potentially bespoke it for their immediate needs and their medium-term goals moving forward. As we now move forward from today, we've got geopolitical involvement in the world of professional football. There are states that own football clubs, and whilst a Premier League football club is a huge brand, it's probably one of the smaller businesses that they own. So what is the reason behind them owning that football club? Where do you, as a sporting director, fit into that from a strategic and an operational perspective? So I think it's a tremendously exciting space. Footballers, whilst it's got one or two challenges, I think, along the way with regards to how the football fan sees the industry at the moment, various issues around pricing and the football fan being priced out of the game. At the same time, I think it's an exciting global environment to be part of. And I think the opportunities are going to continue to grow because I don't want to tempt fate here, but it's often been described as the industry that is recession proof. Time will tell. Time will tell whether that can continue. But it's an exciting business to be in. And fundamentally, what we're seeing now is more educated individuals moving into those very senior level roles, because you have to have an expansive knowledge and skill set at an executive level.
Yeah, well said. And you spoke about the global sort of like identity of the sport itself. And we do know that the World Cup is coming up in 2026 in the US, or US, Canada, and Mexico. And obviously, we have an administration in Trump's administration that might have like geopolitical ramifications for incoming visitors, but specifically around the way the sports industry is developing in the US. So, where do you think the European market should be trying to come to grips with that in terms of trying to take advantage or learnings and best practices that could be implemented within the UK market or European markets, specifically around the sporting director lens?
I think the US market has probably led the way for a number of years now with regards to building the value in their franchises. I think they have led the way with regards to sports marketing. They understand the product. They understand how to pick it up, build it, brand it, and make money out of it. And they've been the leaders in that space for many, many years. There's a great quote, and I want to reference the individual, and I've completely forgotten his name. So this is not from me. But there's a comparison between, for example, the Dallas Cowboys in the NFL in America and Manchester United. And Dallas Cowboys in America have somewhere in the region of about 100 million fans is the number that's thrown out there. Manchester United have somewhere in the region of 1 billion fans is what Manchester United say. The revenue that Dallas Cowboys bring in each year is, again, figures might be slightly wrong here, but somewhere in the region of 1.234 billion. United bring in something like 700 million pounds. So you ask the question, well, they've got 1 billion fans, they've got 100 million, and yet their revenue is more or less double compared to Manchester United. Dallas Cowboys only play roughly 18 games in a regular season. United are playing 40, 50, 60 games and so on and so forth. And where the American sports market is extremely good is understanding how to market that product and commercialize it. The Dallas Cowboys, and again, don't quote me on the exact figures, but the Dallas Cowboys commercialize each and every one of their 100 million fans to the average of about $60 per person. Manchester United is something like 63 cents. So if United can, and I hope they don't, because you can see behind me, I'm a Manchester City fan, but if United increase their value with regards to how much they commercialise their fan base, even just up to £1, then there's a significant revenue boost that is potentially coming their way. So you can see how the US market has been extremely successful over the years with understanding how to commercialize products in the US on a global level. And then we look at, just use the Premier League as an example, and we can also look at other European leagues. But there's a lot of money coming into the Premier League and other leagues in the UK from US investors, private equity and venture capitalists. And they're looking at these leagues over here in the UK and they're saying, well, I can go and buy a brand new franchise in the MLS in America, but the starting point is somewhere in the region of $500-600 million. I can go and pick up Newcastle United. I know it wasn't American owners, and pay 290-300 million pounds for them, and I've got a traditional English football club playing in the Premier League, which is obviously globally renowned, and they see these organisations as being undervalued, and therefore they see the potential in being able to drive revenues and at some point, I'm sure, have an exit plan to move on.
Yeah, it's very true what you've just mentioned. It shows you the sort of like the capitalization of the American markets and obviously the ethos that the country's built on, which is capitalism, or you could say entrepreneurship, or freedom of movement, freedom of expression. But in terms of Europe, I know that VSI had a trip to Red Bulls not too long ago, and in his business, the chairman, I guess, he also came along for that trip. What key learnings would you be able to express to our viewers or listeners when it comes to what the football industry could learn from other high-performing industries like Formula One in that sense?
Yeah, so me and my co-founder in VSI, Andrew McIntyre, are very, very supportive, and we advocate a lot the need and the interest to look outside your industry, your sport, wherever you operate. So recently, I think about 2 months ago now, on the VSI Sporting Directors course, it was on our module 2, which is on our high performance module. We took them to Red Bull Formula One in Milton Keynes, just outside of London, for 2 days. And we pulled together a whole 2 days with their head of performance at Red Bull. And we took them on the journey of what it's like to work in such an environment, from the whole operation that goes behind a race, basically, whether that be in Europe, America, Southeast Asia, wherever it may be. And whilst a lot of the skills are very similar, i.e., you have to be able to lead, you have to be able to manage, you have to be able to crisis manage and lead, you have to be able to work with pressure. The operational infrastructure that goes into that is fundamental, and there's a lot of people involved in it. Just seeing it from a different perspective, from a different environment, I think allows you to open your mind, stimulate new ideas, or refine ideas that you're working with at this moment in time. So that created a great amount of discussion amongst the delegates. They'll leave and they'll go back into their environment. So let's say football as an example, and they'll look at a perspective from Formula One and say, I get the relativeness of how that can be implemented into football. We can't do it exactly that way, but what we can do is we can take a component of that and we can deliver it into this environment, and we can hopefully improve our performance. There's also, I think, other ways of looking at it where when you're working in a high performing sports organization, every day, if you use football for like 9 months, you need to be able to break it up. You need to be able to recalibrate. You need to be able to re-stimulate the environment with new ideas. And sometimes you are acutely aware that this is not an idea that you're not going to run for a long time. It's just an idea that you need to bring into the environment to wake people up, to get them engaged and interested from a different perspective, to take them out of the day-to-day normality of what they're doing. Being curious enough, and that's the key, being curious enough to actually go and step into an environment which is not your norm is I think really important with regards to you then being able to give yourself a fresh spark and provide you with something different that maybe your competitors don't have. As an example, beyond Red Bull, last week on our sporting directors course, we brought into 4-hour masterclass, should I say, with a gentleman called Eamon Devlin. His business is called Minute Nine. And Eamon has been working with Carlo Ancelotti at Real Madrid and the Miami Heat in the NBA in America, looking at halftime team talks and game day communication. And the information that he's gathered over the last few years and the research that he's pulled from that is really interesting. Some of it, I'll say myself, is a bit wacky and a bit way out there. And you think, no, you couldn't do that. But if you allow yourself to just sit with that for a while, you can take a version of that and say, we can't do that, but we could implement this. And again, the whole purpose of that whole session was to create different ways of thinking, to explore new avenues, to unlock your traditional way of looking at the world that you operate in, to see if you can develop the edge, what can give you the edge if you're the sporting director or the head coach, to take ideas from different places and then deliver them. At the same time, what I would say is, in footballs, it's interesting at the moment. There's a lot of conversation going on about certain clubs that have brought in experts from other sports, and what they're then trying to do is say everything you do in football is not really that good. What you should do is this. And there's a bit of a backlash, and and also I think there's a bit of a lack of understanding that whilst you can take new ideas, you have to be very conscious of the environment that you're working in. And it's not always appropriate for that environment. It might be for the next club, but not for you. So, as I say, myself and my business partner, Andy McIntyre, we constantly stretch ourselves and our courses to look outside of the world we live in and to challenge how we think, and to see if we can bring those ideas and that those expanses to what we're doing.
And when you look at the sort of the status of the industry, the football industry specifically in England, do you think there's a need for more? I mean, I spoke to Kieran Maguire when he spoke about the need for more financial transparency, and we can all agree that lots of clubs, all the way down to lower leagues, are not as transparent as they need to be when it comes to their finances. And then we can say the same about executives in different executive positions, from the sporting director to the CFO to the CEO. What's your opinion when it comes to requiring for more communication from a sporting director to not just the fan base, but also the stakeholders across board?
Yeah, it's an interesting debate at the moment. And I'm not, if I'm honest, I'm not too sure where I sit on that at this moment in time. I'm a co-founder and an owner of VSI Executive Education. Should I be speaking to our delegates or other people around how much money the business brings in and what I get paid and what bonuses are and so on and so forth? I don't think so. You then take that aspect into football. At the end of the year, Everyone's all the clubs' accounts are on Companies House there. You can go on and you can get a feel for how that club is operating. I'll often say this to managers and friends of mine when they're taking roles, and they'll share ideas with me around where they think the club are. One of the first questions I always ask to them is, well, have you been on Companies House? Have you looked at their accounts? Can you see how much money they are making? Can you see what their costs are, and so on and so forth? That will give you an indication of where that potential business is. I myself graduated with an international master's degree in sports law just before Christmas. And my dissertation focused on how you buy a club in the UK. And through that process, I spoke with lots of individuals in that place, both owners of clubs and potential investors moving forward. And what I found from that was quite interesting. And what the potential investors were saying to me, and generally these were from overseas, was that the UK market has been vibrant for a number of years. What with the potential introduction of an independent regulator and some of the political decisions the government are making here in the UK with regarding to non-doms and people that are extremely wealthy over here, and it might be time for them just to take their foot off the gas a little bit and see what happens with regards to the economy in the UK and with regards to various investment opportunities and how the government are going to perceive that. There's also a discussion around this independent regulator. And again, you get some ownership groups that are quite keen on that because they feel that with more regulation, then they're better able to manage their resources, a bit like in the US. And then you've got other potential investors that are a little bit annoyed in it because they're saying, well, if I'm coming over and I'm going to invest X amount of, hundreds of millions of pounds into this potential business, maybe billions when we're talking Premier League club, then who are they to tell me how I should then run my business and where I should spend my money? Now, you have that show being played out, but wrapped around that is you've then got the whole economy of football and fair play, and the league has to be balanced. There has to be jeopardy in the league. You don't want to go to a game where you know that such and such a team is going to win 5-0. Fans aren't going to turn up anymore. It devalues the product. Broadcasters aren't going to pay the money. Fans aren't going to buy tickets, so on and so forth. So we are in a real interesting space with regards to where financial fair play, PSR, as obviously it's moving into in the UK and in Europe, is going. What the answer is, Kieran is someone that I know very well. Kieran's delivered a few sessions on our courses over the years. Professor Rob Wilson is our course lead. Professor Rob Wilson is another finance expert alongside Kieran Maguire. So we're engaged in these conversations all the time at that academic level, and then I'm involved in those conversations all the time with sporting directors, heads of recruitment that are obviously having to work within the windows available for them with regards to PSR. So this financial transparency aspect is interesting. And as I said at the beginning, I don't know. As an individual that runs a business, obviously on a lot smaller scale than a professional football club, it's our business. We have an understanding with regards to what we're looking to achieve and where we're looking to go. We have our judicial rules and regulations that we have to adhere to as an owner of a business. And if you do that, then should your financial component of the business be transparent? I'm a little uncomfortable with that.
But no, specifically around the sporting project itself. When I speak about the sporting director is in charge of the sporting projects, the vision, implementing the vision of the owners or the CEO, making sure that there's a style of play, making sure that there's a consistency between all the different departments that sit under the sporting director, from the academy to the women's team to the analytics and so on and so forth, sits under the sporting director's responsibility. So the question here is, what specifically do you think should clubs do when it comes to communicating the vision or communicating what the project is to the fan base. Outside of financial transparency, don't you think there should be a sporting transparency? Politicians communicate a lot to their constituency. Whether we like it or not, the football club is a community asset. Yeah, it's sort of a business, but we use this term called custodianship. And that's used because it means that the owners are temporary, and because the asset itself is housed by the community. So there is some responsibility from the club to the community in that sense. So from a sporting director perspective, in your opinion, what do you think the responsibility is on them to communicate what the vision is outside of financial sort of like numbers or figures?
I think in most businesses, in most walks of life, communication is central to a healthy, functioning, progressive relationship. Without communication, people will make assumptions, and generally those assumptions are going to be wrong. So yes, communication from clubs to their fans and then greater stakeholders is essential. The question always then comes back to how much communication and through what various means and methods and portals and so on and so forth. And then, of course, it's how that communication lands with the people on the receiving end of that. We all know this, don't we, from life? You can put a communication out there. It can mean something completely different to one person than the next person. I do think that over the last kind of 10 years, clubs are much more savvy and much more aware with regards to the needs to get closer to their fan group and to communicate to their fan group. Again, I think it needs to be bespoke for each club. If you take a major global brand in the Premier League now, their fans will be split up into a number of different fan bases, won't they? So you've got the fans that probably come along to every single game. You've then got the followers who are based in other parts of the country and around the world. And therefore, how you communicate to them, the clubs are still playing around with that because they're not quite sure the best way to do it so that the message lands, because potentially the message is different depending on the level of engagement those fans have with that actual business. As you move down the lower leagues and your fan base is probably much more controlled within the community that you live in, then that communication, I'm not saying it's easier, but it's probably more focused. But once again, depending on who picks up on that communication, it can lead to multiple different meanings. But the core of the question for me is, in my experience over the years, the clubs now are businesses. Whether we like that or not, I see a lot of noise on a global level on all the various different platforms, which talks about football has sold its soul. It's no longer a sport, it's a business. Yeah, it is. It is a business. And I suppose if as a fan you want to go along and sit in a relatively comfortable stadium, which again I have one or two challenges with, because I think sometimes the atmospheres, particularly in the UK, the atmospheres can be quite vanilla now, and it's lost that traditional approach, which I think there are some good values to. But if that's the way that we want to go down, we want to see the best players with the best technology and the best facility and the best pitches and so on and so forth. We are operating in a business, and that's not going to change.
Okay, yeah, it's a well understood message to any listener or viewer. So we can transition very quickly to the rapid fires session, where I ask you a quick question and you give me your quick answer. So my first question to you would be, what's the most impactful book you've read during your career as a co-founder of ESI?
So many, absolutely so many. There's two books. There's going off on a side a little bit here. It might be a little bit political, but there's a great book called Strong Men Create Weak Times. Sorry, weak men create hard times, and it's almost like a 600-700 page book which focuses on leaders for thousands of years, and then that kind of cycle that the world tends to go in. That was impactful on me with regards to, I think the time I read it, the real world stories behind it. And then a book I'm reading at the moment is called Never Eat Alone, and it's all about the art of professional networking. So it will take you on a journey of you find yourself in a role where you are relatively important within that industry organization. You have a perception of yourself, and you then tend to uh, get involved in the weeds 24/7, and you don't look out and you don't see that extended network that you still need to be operating in, and you still need to service to a perspective. And again, it gives you some useful little ideas with regards to how you can go about developing that network, because in my experience, when most people network, they come along and they ask you for something. And I think that's wrong. I think everyone has to be able to be in a position where they can add value to each other. And over a period of time, you nurture that relationship. And then people are much more accomplished and thoughtful with regards to how they give their time and their experience.
Yeah, that's well said, and that's applicable to any industry, not just sports. And the second question would be, I know that you and your co-founder, when you started or when you found this gap in the market, you found that the target audience for this was, or target segments was for this was the footballer trying to transition, or footballer trying to look for options when it comes to post-playing career, or people outside the football industry trying to get into the football industry, if that's not mistaken. So now, where you have big ambitions to go global, markets such as the Australian market, the UAE, the American markets, what do you think now is the ideal customer profile that you're targeting?
Yeah, we constantly have this conversation. So, we love working with athletes. I was one myself, and then my journey changed. So we love working with professional athletes who are curious about the next stage of their career and how they get to that point. So that will never change. We'll still be operating in that space. At the same time, now there are people that are working in the industry. So they may be heads of performance analytics, medical coaching, so on and so forth. And they are looking to move from a head of department to actually a strategic leadership role within the business. So there are two market segments that we work with the most with regards to educating them through the programs.
Okay, great. The final question would be, what has been the most impactful part of this journey that you've had with VSI?
The most impactful part of this journey is when things go wrong. We've built a business where we started 15 years ago, and we're still here today. So we must be doing something correct. But the most impactful stage along this journey, there are three particular instances that come to mind, and every single time that happened, they have been most impactful because they have been very nearly disastrous from the business's perspective, and then that impacts you personally, and it also impacts your family. So they are really, really, really tough times, and they've happened a couple of times, and I'll guarantee you it will happen again. It will happen again. You develop that resilience, you develop that, ultra kind of bulletproof confidence that you can come through this. And I was listening to a podcast only the other day with a quote from Kobe Bryant, which he came out with when I think he'd ruptured his Achilles, and he came out with a quote that said, "If you see me fighting with the bear, pray for the bear." And I went, yeah, that's where I'm going.
Yes, it's a good mindset. I think Henri not too long ago said that if you want to be a top athlete, you need to love pain, and I think it's the same for
Yeah.
entrepreneur. So yeah, Tony, thank you so much for taking us through this fascinating journey through the evolving world of sports leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. Thank you very much.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Football Economy. If Tony's story has sparked an interest in what leadership looks like beyond the sports industry, then don't forget to continue to join us in this conversation around sports ecosystem. Don't forget to subscribe for more conversations like this at the intersection of football and business. Until next time, take care. Bye.